Wired.com presents The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. And here is your host, David Barr Kirtley.
Hello, and welcome to episode 363 of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. Our guest today is Matt Barton. He's a professor of English at St. Cloud University in Minnesota, and he's written several books about video game history, including vintage games and honoring the code. He's also the host of the popular YouTube show Matt Chat, which features interviews with leading game designers, with a special emphasis on computer role-playing games of the 80s and 90s. And we'll be speaking with him today about his new book Dungeons and Desktops, The History of Computer Role-Playing Games 2nd Edition, which he wrote with Shane Stacks. And now here's our interview with Matt Barton. All right, so we're here with Matt Barton. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Dave. Good to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Oh, yeah. Thanks for being on the show. I've been a fan of your YouTube channel for a long time, so I'm excited to be able to talk to you.
Oh, great.
So my first question is, you've said that your first CRPG that you ever played was The Bard's Tale. So tell us about that.
Yeah, it's the first one I have any solid memories of. I remember being, I must have been about 6 or 7 years old. I don't quite remember. I just remember my grandmother had a Commodore 64 computer that she did taxes on, and she did a lot of babysitting. And so I'd load up this weird game called Bard's Tale, create a party of characters. And that was really the fun for me back then, just being a kid creating some characters. Of course, I would die almost immediately after leaving the Adventurers Guild, but, that was okay. Just let me go back and create some more characters.
Yeah, I mean, that was certainly my experience playing Bard's Tale, is that I don't think I ever made it more than about 15 feet from the Adventurers Guild. Yeah,
had a lot more patience back then for that sort of thing, but yeah, I never really played Dungeons and Dragons, the tabletop game. I'd of course heard about it. I watched the cartoon and things like that. So it was, kind of, it seemed like it was in that vein, the Bard's Tale. So that was kind of another draw too. So I didn't have kids around that were interested in this stuff. So it's about, I guess it was a way to immerse myself into that sort of fantasy setting.
You say in the book that you had a pirated copy initially, and you didn't even have the instructions manual or anything?
Yeah, although I have been granted amnesty by Mr. Fargo for his later Bard's Tale Kickstarter project. Yeah, everything was pirated. It wasn't very uncommon back then. You just would have the home copies with this handwritten label, Bard's Tale 1, 2, whatever. The problem with a game like that, though, and I had this problem too with Wizardry, was a lot of the stuff, if you didn't have the manual, you're kind of SOL. With the like knowing the names of spells and things. I'm trying to remember what it was about Bard's Tale. There was something, it seemed like there was some subtle copy protection with that game. You might remember, you might know more than I do about it at this point.
I mean, I haven't played Bard's Tale since I was 8 years old too, or something. I feel like it might have asked you to look up words in the manual or something, but I don't really remember.
Yeah, I can't remember. I might be getting my wires crossed with Wizardry. But I remember definitely Wizardry would make you type in a little code for the spells.
Because a lot of those games were hard. I mean, those early CRPGs. And the first one I ever played was Wizard's Crown. And again, I was 8 years old, and I couldn't make heads or tails of that game. Even
I don't know
if I could make
heads or tails of that game now. that was a very tactically complicated game. Those were the guys that went on to make the Pool of Radiance gold box engine based on that. They simplified it, I guess, in some ways. What'd you have, like 13 characters or something crazy on that?
I don't even remember, but yeah, I mean, you even say in the book that there were all these options for, you could lie prone. I mean, there was so many, it was just this overwhelming number of menus and everything.
Pretty much every key on the keyboard did something. Yeah, that was crazy.
But yeah, I wanted to ask you about Pool of Radiance which is, if people don't know, basically the first official Dungeons and Dragons CRPG. But you say in the book, it wasn't until I planted my foot on the corpse of the evil dragon Tyrant Thraxus that I knew what it meant to love a computer game. Never before had a game held me so deeply in its power.
You're giving me goosebumps. Who wrote that? Yeah, that was definitely a turning point for me. And, with Pool of Radiance, again, that was the first time I saw, it had Dungeons and Dragons as all officially licensed. I think it was TSR. License at that point, wasn't Wizards of the Coast yet, but published by SSI. Yeah, and I remember getting this game. I think it was my birthday. my birthday was coming up. My grandmother bought it for me, and she wouldn't let me play it, until my birthday. I think it was like a couple weeks out, right? But I convinced her to let me read the manuals. I said, it's a very complicated game. I want to read the instructions so that when when my birthday comes around, I can just jump right in. However, I guess, my rhetorical power was such that she agreed to that. But man, it was kind of I don't know how to describe this, but it was so exciting reading about the game and thinking about what it would be like, kind of fantasizing this, just based on the journal. And then, that game actually has a really nice manual and a journal and everything that comes with it. But even the code wheel is fascinating. So, I was really raring to go when I finally got to be my birthday. I don't think anybody saw me for a couple of days after that.
But you didn't read the adventurer's journal, right? Because so many of the major scenes in the game, it actually has little prose passages in this book, and you have to look up the right one at the right time.
Yeah, and it says in the journal you're not supposed to, or you'll be cursed or whatever. And of course, being the good boy I was back then, of course I didn't read the whole thing twice or anything. I actually planted some fake journal entries in there. So I didn't know. It was fun. I don't think it really spoiled too much. But you're supposed to not refer to that journal except at certain points of the game. It'll say, you heard a tale in the tavern. Go read Tavern Tale number 12. Or the description of this room is in journal entry 20. Something along those lines.
You said that the other kids, you didn't know anyone else who was playing any of these CRPGs?
No, not really. I mean, most of my friends had Nintendos. They were playing Mario and stuff like that. I didn't know anybody. It wasn't really until high school, I think, I finally found a guy that was also playing. He had a game called Hero Quest, a board game. And I remember talking to him a little bit and figuring out that we liked Tolkien. It was just it's like almost like an epiphany, like, ooh. We really kind of became best friends shortly thereafter. But for the longest time, everybody, I grew up in a very rural place in the deep south of Louisiana. So to the extent that anybody had heard of Dungeons and Dragons, they thought it was some kind of Satanism.
So did people try to discourage you from playing the CRPGs?
Yeah, a few, nobody in my immediate family, but, I can't remember if any teachers or anything said anything about it, but that's a good question. I think I might have heard a preacher one time kind of lump Dungeons and Dragons in with, bestiality or something. Nobody ever really discouraged me. My dad was, he was fine with it.
Did you have any sense at that time that this was going to be a part of your life for the rest of your life, that you loved it that much?
Yeah, I think so. It wasn't just the games, the Pool of Radiance had a novel that you could get, and I read that. And I was always thinking at some point I'd be either writing games, or writing fantasy novels maybe, or I just want to do some kind of writing. I didn't know I would end up writing about the games, this capacity, but, it worked out.
Because you became an English professor, so how did that happen?
How did that happen? I ask myself that on a regular basis. How did this happen to me? Like a lot of starry-eyed freshmen, I wanted to go into creative writing and write best-selling fantasy novels, basically be the next George R.R. Barton or Raymond Feist, somebody like that. But somewhere along the way, a professor said, there's this little thing you might want to consider called making a living. It's not that big of a shift to go into this, the more writerly, or the more, technical side of an English major. Learn how to teach writing, learn how to do composition. You already like computers, and there's a lot of stuff you can do around computers and writing software and things of that sort. So he kind of taught me into the studying rhetoric, basically rhetoric and composition. And I never really looked back on that. It's a really great field. I mean, you do have to grade papers. That's something I never saw myself doing. Yeah, but everything else is there. You're still writing, you're still interacting with people that are really interested in the same stuff you are. So I think it worked out really well.
Now, in your college classes that you teach now, do they involve fantasy or role-playing games or anything, or is that sort of a separate aspect of your life?
Well, a lot of them do. I have a course called, a couple courses. There's one called, I just proposed actually, called Understanding Video Games. And I kind of see that. I don't know if, I'm sure you've probably read Scott McCloud and his Understanding Comics.
Yeah, yeah.
So I thought it'd be fun to kind of do something like that, but, of course, that'd be about video games instead. So that's still kind of in the planning phases at this point. But that'll probably be the closest thing I've done so far. But I also have a course called Rhetoric of Popular Culture. And for that one, we certainly do a lot of games. And I also like The Walking Dead and zombies a lot, so we do some of that in there. But yeah, pretty much every course I find some way to bring in games.
I mean, do your students know, do they know your Matt Chat videos, or have they ever watched them?
Sometimes they do. I don't really make a big deal about it because I think it's more fun when, at some point in the middle of the semester, some student will come up to me and they're like, "Are you the same Matt Barton that does Matt Chat?" Wow, yeah, I guess it must be totally different personas if you don't recognize me.
Yeah, because you're in these videos.
I'm right there on the video. I mean, unless it's like an identical twin. But yeah, it's kind of fun. It's not to the point where I'm walking around in public and people recognize, "Oh, you're, the guy from that." It's not like that. But yeah, I think it's kind of a pleasant surprise when students figure that out. But just to my the videos I do for my online classes and things, I have a separate YouTube channel for that.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you say in the book that you think that CRPGs are actually really educational.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Why don't you talk about that? Because you say that Robert Reich. Talk about Robert Reich and his 4 basic skills.
Well, him and James Paul G. There's a couple other ones. There's Jane McGonigal. She's got some TED Talks where they talk about this. A lot of it, there's a word gamification that comes up sometimes. But just for me, what it amounts to is it's not so much that you learn valuable content from playing these games, but you do learn sort of habits of thinking, I guess is the way I write about it in here. So really, it kind of comes down to the scientific method, learning about statistical reasoning. If you really are good at these games and you play them enough, you'll start to pick up on things like, well, I should use this weapon instead of that weapon, or here's a different kind of creature. They have these kinds of resistances. It's that kind of observations, and then you try something, you measure the results, you modify your tactics along the way. And really, even though these are fights with rats or skeletons or zombies or whatever the case may be, you're kind of training your mind to approach problems in a certain way that's just straight out of a science textbook. I got a quote in there from, I know his last name is Moses. I forget his first name. But anyway, the father of statistics defines statistics as learning from experience. It is how he defines the entire field. And really, I think this is crystallized in role-playing games, not just CRPGs, but any role-playing games, because that's really what you're doing. I guess somewhat a step removed, because it's your characters that are learning from their experience and gaining levels. But at the same time, you as a player are too, because you're learning how to play that game better.
I mean, are there examples of specific examples you could point to of people who played a lot of CRPGs and now they're CEO of Microsoft or anything like that?
Oh yeah, there's countless. Most of the people I'm familiar with are, of course, from the games industry. But Trip Hawkins, talk about him a little bit in the book, the Electronic Arts founder. So he talks a lot about how he was even doing stuff similar to D&D before D&D came out. There was some baseball games that were basically, a lot of overlap with wargaming there. A lot of statistical reasoning. I think it was called Stratomatic. I'm pretty sure it was called Stratomatic.
Yeah, I think that's right.
But yeah, pretty much any big figure in the games industry has played either D&D or CRPGs. Yeah, other fields though, I'd be kind of curious. I haven't done a lot of work there. I don't know how many. Certainly, a lot of professors I talked to have played D&D. I think would agree. I don't know. What do you find? You've talked to a lot of big names from many fields. Do they mention role-playing games?
I think Dungeons and Dragons, like the tabletop Dungeons and Dragons, I've certainly heard people talk about that as, developing leadership skills and group management skills and stuff like that, and making deadlines, because, being a dungeon master is a ton of work. I'm not thinking offhand of a lot of examples of CRPGs, but I mean, I definitely, like, what you say makes a lot of sense. I mean, when you're talking about Robert Reich, you say that he says that the skills for the future are abstraction, system thinking, experimentation, and collaboration, and that CRPGs help you hone all those skills.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of people will say, well, why not? Isn't Dungeons and Dragons better for that than the computer versions? Or why not play something like World of Warcraft? Or I guess Fortnite, something like this. But, as I kind of argue in the book, the problem with that is when you get to collaboration. A lot of the, if you just kind of luck out, sometimes you'll find a good group of people to play with. But, more often than not, you kind of have a negative experience with collaboration. Just as coming back to being a professor, this is something, students tell me this all the time. And I'll say, well, why don't you collaborate on this project? Or let's have a group project. Everybody just groans. Oh, God, anything but that. I hate this. It's just because of these bad experiences working with people. But it's really just that, they haven't really been trained to do it, right? They don't. They're not used to working with other people. It's not schools or a lot of these games don't promote that or privilege that very much. But a lot of these computer role-playing games, like the Wizardry series or some of the Ultimas, you have a group of people, but or the Baldur's Gate series is another good example of this. You're sort of controlling these characters, but it's an idealized form of collaboration, right? So you figure out, well, if I do this, this person will lead the party. Or, here's the way to, butter this person up to keep them in the party and leverage their special skills, whatever that is. So I think that kind of, those kind of games really do train you to be a better collaborator.
Yeah, or it's almost like your party members are your employees, and you have to know what their strengths and weaknesses are, and utilize them to their best. Yeah. Yeah,
exactly. It's not just about making one character super strong. It's about leveraging all the different party members, and the better games is to be a very diverse set of skills and characters. So I think it's a great experience for management or collaboration.
Yeah. Well, so talk about Dungeons and Desktops. How did that come about? The first edition.
The first edition. Well, what had happened was I was part of a website called Armchair Arcade, which is really one of the first blogs about vintage and retro games, vintage computers. And I don't know how the idea occurred to me, but one day I was just like, why not do some articles or some blog posts about the history of computer role-playing games? So this kind of just started off as informal blog posts. But when I posted the first one, which I think was the Dark Ages, maybe, I think it was the Dark Ages, which, Plato games and the really, really early mainframe stuff. But it was like, boom, it just took over. Slashdot, Gamma Sutra. It just got tremendous attention, this blog post. It's kind of like, whoa, I really got a tiger by the tail here. And Gamma Sutra approached me and said, okay, why don't we let us pay you? Do your other posts on this for us, and we'll pay you to do that, and you'll get a lot more publicity. So it worked out pretty well for them and for me. But at some point, a publisher, A.K. Peters, I guess, had approached Gamma Sutra just looking for topics. They wanted some book ideas, I guess. So the guy had been working with Simon Carlos over there, told him about me in these blog posts. So the publisher got in touch, and we started talking about maybe expanding this into a book. And Of course, this is really, really exciting for me. This is a dream I'd had all the way back since I was a kid, actually publish a book. And they even let me get Clyde Caldwell, who done all the paintings for my favorite games, A Pool of Radiance and all those. Got to license the one of his paintings from a Dragon magazine cover. I didn't even know you could do that, but I guess that had been a Dragon magazine cover, so we were able to get that for my book. So yeah, it all came together really, really, I guess you could say that kind of launched my career, really. As a professor, too, you want to have books published.
So then what sort of response did you get to the book from readers or reviewers or whatever?
Well, generally pretty good. I mean, the book, the first edition did have a few problems. The screenshots were kind of the bugbear. They kind of, I don't want to talk too bad about the about the screen, but these were kind of small and grainy images, and a lot of reviewers dissed that. They criticized that point, and they, I can see where they're coming from, because video games, it's right there in the name, right? Video. These are very artistic, it's a very graphics intensive medium, and it's really important to be able to see if you're going to have a screenshot, people want to see, well, first of all, do you have the screenshot? But secondly, they really want to be able to make out the details and be able to compare. What did the Bard's Tale look like? That was, mid-'80s. How does that compare to, say, Baldur's Gate? And when you can really get a good look at those screenshots and, compare and contrast those, I think that really helps you understand just how significant that evolution was. Just being able to look at those images. So that was one of the big criticisms. And I think another of the criticisms was I was just trying to pack too much in. So I really didn't want to let any game, no matter how obscure, I really wanted this thing to be comprehensive and talk about everything. But what the end result of that was a lot of just little, maybe like a half a paragraph about a game. And then here comes another game, and it kind of disrupted the narrative. It kind of gets a little bit patchwork, I guess, is the word for that. It kind of basically disrupted the continuity. So I got a little bit of criticisms on that, and then, of course, typos and just little howlers. Errors creep in. Some of these games I hadn't played as a kid, and I might have booted them up and played them for a few minutes, enough to kind of get a feel for it. So sometimes I made mistakes.
So I was wondering, because these books cover hundreds, if not more, games, and some of these games take like 100 to 200 hours or something to beat.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's no human way you could play all the games in this book, start to finish.
So what percentage of the games mentioned in the book would you say you've actually played for a significant amount of time?
Oh, that's a good question. What do you mean by significant amount of time? I guess I definitely haven't played many, or that's a good. I'm trying to think of the ones I've definitely played all the way through. I think you could probably sort of tell by reading, how much I say about a game. It's probably a pretty good indication of, to what extent I played it. But I've played most of the Might and Magics all the way through, and of course the Baldur's Gate. I would say pretty much all the major games I've definitely played all the way through. And some of the lesser ones, it's just kind of hit or miss. But I'm still working on that even today, right? Trying to play some of the lesser known games.
I thought it was interesting because you said that at the time that you wrote that book that you thought that the CRPG field was actually dying, and you thought this was going to be sort of a love letter to a lost art.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it really did seem like that because with the first Dungeons and Desktops book, World of Warcraft, or Craft, I should say, that game I think it was kind of at its peak at that time. And I forget how many, it was just an incredible number of subscribers on that. And, even talking to people like Fargo of In Exile, and they're, I don't know, actually, it's a good question. Did they have In Exile back then? But even a lot of these, legacy developers were saying, no, there's just no market for this. No publishers are interested in a single player epic scope computer role-playing game. And it was really kind of depressing to me. And I almost wonder, looking back, if one of the reasons I wanted to write this book was just to sort of remind people how great this genre was. Kind of inspire more developers to try their hand at making a CRPG, or at least getting more players interested, create more of a market. So some of the some of these folks, like maybe Fargo, could say, look, there's obviously a lot of interest in this genre. There's even a book out, where they're talking about all of my early games. But yeah, it was definitely depressing. And I remember later talking to some of these developers that had read the book, and they were saying, yeah, I would go to these big gaming conventions, CGE or E3 or something like that, or GDC. And I would say, yeah, we did. I worked on Wizardry, or I worked on Bard's Tale or something. And they would just be met with blank stares. Like, what is that? And that was just, terrible. So I really think, though, that it didn't die. Thankfully. Yeah, but we didn't have Kickstarter back then, or any kind of crowdfunding thing. So anybody doing single player RPGs, it was like basically somebody in a very low funded single person team, sort of a setup with low distribution. I don't even know. I think, was Steam even out back then?
Yeah, I'm not even sure.
Yeah, I'm not even sure if the independents really had a good way to publish their stuff yet. So anyway, a lot changed in a short period of time after that book.
Well, so talk about, so you had the book come out, and then you also started up this Matt Chat YouTube series. So talk about how did you decide to start that up?
Well, it started off basically as a way to promote the book. I was kind of struck by, again, the visual, how intensely visual this medium is. And as good as screenshots, let's not even get back into that, but I was thinking, well, if screenshots would be great, wouldn't it be even better if you could actually see the games in a video format? So this was kind of the early days of YouTube. I think they limited you to maybe 5-10 minutes. So I really wasn't able to do much. But my original plan was just take a different game, show some of the gameplay, talk about what I said in the book, basically, and then kind of expanded from there. And then finally it got to the point where I realized I could record Skype conversations. That's sort of like what you do, right?
Yeah.
And, once I got to that point, I thought, why not see if I could contact some of these developers and interview them? Because I really hadn't done much of that in the first book. I just would play the games, not really worry about who made it or, what they were like. And so I really got into that part of it really hard and heavy. And this is what Matt Chat really was. It's like, here's the folks who made the games, or that's what it became, I should say. Here's the folks that made the games. Here's what they were thinking. Here's what they're like. And, here's the problems they were struggling with. Here's the solutions they came up with. So, I've had a lot of fun with that over the years.
Was it hard to get in touch with any of those people, or to convince them to be on your YouTube show?
Not really. A lot of them were just flabbergasted by, like, somebody wants to talk to me? Really? You want me to be on a show? I didn't think, nobody's even asked me about this game in, a decade. I'm not even really sure I remember much about it. That was the kind of attitude I would be confronted with usually. But yeah, it's really more the opposite problem. It's kind of this embarrassment of riches, right? Once I started doing this, I get people contacting me and saying, look, here's who I am. I worked on this series. I saw your interview with, say, Jeff McCord or whoever it was. And, I've got some stuff I like to talk about as well. So it's just one after another. Boom, boom, boom. It's a lot of untold stories.
Well, right. We were talking earlier about Pool of Radiance, which you said was made by a company called SSI. And I mean, SSI, I felt like they were really popular at the time. I mean, I played so many of their games. But then I would go looking for information about, who made these games or what was this company like or what were they thinking or trying to accomplish. And I just couldn't really find anything until until I saw interviews like your interview with Joel Billings. Was there anything out there about a lot of these developers, or were you really the first person to?
I was definitely the first person to interview many of them in a video format. I mean, most of them, the big names, of course, they'd done interviews for magazines. It's basically about it.
But I'm imagining most of those were not available. I mean, those interviews had appeared in magazines and they weren't online anywhere.
Yeah, I don't know about legally online. I got a lot of my information from what was it? It was a magazine, Computer Games Magazine, I think. Could be
Computer Gaming.
Computer Gaming. Yeah, it's it. Computer Gaming World. Yeah, that was available. Somebody posted the whole archive of that in a BitTorrent file. So I was able to download all that, and a lot of those would have interviews in them. But, it's a magazine, so they might have a one-page interview, 5 or 6 questions. But, yeah, not many of them had. There's a few of them, like the really big names, somebody like Richard Garriott, Lord British. They had been interviewed for books. There's a book called Dungeons and Dreamers and Hackers by Stephen Levy. So there's a few of them that have been interviewed. Yeah, but for a lot of them, this was, when I talked to him, it was the first time that ever been seriously interviewed by somebody that was, familiar with their work and wasn't just, interested in whatever their latest game was that they're promoting at the moment.
I thought the thing was so interesting because I was always so curious about SSI and the Joel Billings, in the book, you talked to this guy, Craig Roth. He had been one of the early SSI guys.
Yeah. Shard of Spring.
And he said that, a lot of those early games, they were made by just one person or maybe a couple people. And that with Pool of Radiance, that was the first time he'd ever seen just this big team with, dedicated artists and dedicated programmers making a game. And he could just see like, oh, this is the future. Everything's really changing here.
Yeah, I think I sort of have mixed feelings about all that. But, I just recently talked to Brent Knowles of BioWare, who had been working on, he worked on Baldur's Gate 2, Neverwinter Nights, Dragon Age Origins, and he kind of told us some similar stories, a little slightly different in scale, but there's this thing about periods where just a small team, or maybe even just one person, it's not so much about the size of the team, it's whether one person or the small group really has control over the project. Because what happens is as things start to scale upwards, the control is kind of, it becomes more of a game made by committee, right? There's kind of like a movie, like a big Hollywood production. I guess if you could imagine that, but the producer even doesn't really have much power or say so. So you get these sort of watered down projects, a lot of, it's trying to please everybody kind of projects without a lot of creative vision. I guess that's really what it comes down to. There's not a unified vision like you get in those early games like the Shard of Springs or the, look at all the early Ultima games where it was mostly Lord British. I think you really see a huge difference when you go from, say, something like Ultima's 3 or 4, and then compare that to the Ultima 9. Or if you look at the Ultima Online, something with a lot bigger scale. So I think you really lose something when you move from the small teams. But what's really exciting to me is in this era that we're in now, all these development tools and assets are getting to the point where we're kind of back to where just one person or a small team can make make their own CRPG, just like, Garriott was doing back in the 80s, but have it not look like it was something made back in the 80s, right? But using something like Unity or all these tools, you can make something that really is competitive, looks just as good as any of the, $60 games out there. Just played Druidstone. So this is some of the Almost Human guys. So they even got to a smaller team from, if you don't know about them, they worked on the Legend of Grimrock games, which are really excellent games, but very small team. They got even smaller to make this Druidstone game. But it's just the tools are such where it looks magnificent to me. Play is great. If you're willing, just as long as people are willing to put the time in there to really polish it, if they are talented, you don't have to have this giant team and hundreds of millions of dollars to make something that's really impressive.
Well, I wanted to ask you about that because this whole kickstarted CRPG movement was really started with Wasteland 2. And there's kind of a funny story where you were interviewing Brian Fargo on your Matt Chat show, and that kind of played into that.
Yeah, I forget how it comes up, because he was kind of a little bit despondent, I think, in that first part of the interview. He's telling me all about how, things were great, and then things started to decline, and they kind of had to work on these, they're just trying to stay afloat, right? Make games that they can make money on, that the publisher will show interest in. And if you watch his promo for the first Wasteland game, he's got a kid in there it's pretty hilarious. But he kind of satirizes what he was dealing with.
Yeah, he has a little kid who's playing the video game company executive who's never heard of any of his old games before. And yeah,
exactly. But yeah, I asked him at one point, if you're going to make Wasteland 2 today, what would it be like? What would be your plans for that? And you could tell he just kind of, his eyes just kind of widened there for a minute, and you could see, you could literally see, on his face, like he's really thinking this through. It's like the first time it had ever really occurred to him, like, well, what would that be like? It's like this light bulb goes off. It's really an impressive moment to have captured on video, I think. I don't know if that's ever happened before.
Well, right,
yeah,
and it's clear that he hasn't really thought about it up to that point. He has to sort of pause and really think about it. And then within, a year or so of that, he's actually kickstarting Wasteland 2. So,
yeah, and he has acknowledged it. It kind of comes back to that moment of that interview where he was, asked him that question. He started thinking about it. He got more and more excited about it. Think too about the relationship I had with him during that interview. Here's somebody who kind of grew up playing his games, big fan of the series, who's really excited to talk to him. It must have been really invigorating for him. He's just talking to people never even heard of his stuff before, and to realize, hey, I'm just one guy, but I represent thousands and thousands of people just like me that would love to see a Wasteland 2. So I like to think I really played a role in that.
Yeah, I think you deserve probably about half the credit for Wasteland 2.
Well, I don't know if I'd go that far, but yeah, just a lot of people, they don't realize that there's still a lot of interest in that. People are. That's why I tell people all the time. If you really like if you're playing some old game, it's not that hard to figure out who made it and send them a shout out on Twitter or something. You really do make their day with stuff like that. So,
yeah. Well, so talk about, there's now just out the second edition of Dungeons and Desktop. So just talk about why you decided to do a second edition.
Well, there's a lot of reasons. I think enough time had passed for one thing, and we've been talking all during this interview about some of these big developments. But, I think I'd had enough time to think about what I liked about the first edition and what I could have done better. Had a lot of time to think about that. So that was a big part of it. I was kind of excited to go back in and sort of address what I saw as the biggest problems, which we've already talked about, just maintaining a more coherent narrative, of course, fixing the screenshots, adding in all the insights I've gained from something like 10 years of interviewing these game developers and game designers. I wanted to call it Advanced Dungeons and Desktops. Publisher didn't go for that idea, but I really feel like I'm a lot more advanced on the topic than I. The first one almost feels kind of naive. It's kind of the first time somebody had done a book like this. A lot of people hadn't even heard of some of these games before. Nobody had ever interviewed the developers, and it's just a lot of stuff that hadn't been done yet. Of course, the second edition is able to incorporate all of that, all of those insights.
How did Shane Stacks get involved?
That's a good question. I don't know how he first got involved. It seemed like he had read the first edition and found me on YouTube. And so we kind of became friends that way. But his contribution, his big contribution was he had, unlike me growing up in this really literally a village in the woods. He grew up in a big enough town, and he went into the Navy, I think, when he got older. But he had played a lot of Dungeons and Dragons and Pathfinder. He's really up on all the tabletop role-playing games and going to the conventions and things. So he was able to fill that gap. One of his main contributions. And so I think it's kind of a combination of that and just being good friends, work well together. I think it was his idea to do the second edition. I think he was saying, we need to do something, It's been long enough since you've done the first edition. So he kept on with that for a while, and finally, I remember what it was. He wanted to do a digital version of Dungeons and Desktops. He kept talking about that, and I guess enough time had gone by where finally I'm like, why don't we just do a second edition? And you could do the digital stuff on, as part of that. It's like, okay, let's talk to the publisher. And the publisher got really excited because this is one of the books, most books, they sell all they're going to sell, right, in the first few months, about first 6 months, and then it's pretty much dead. But this is a book that's pretty much, it hasn't sold in huge numbers, but it's been a consistent seller. Even after all the other books I've written, this is the first edition of this book still sells more copies usually than, all the other ones. So when I said second edition, they were really excited. There wasn't any, it wasn't any hemming and hawing. They're like, get it done quickly. We want it as soon as you can, get this thing finished up. I actually had to put the brakes on them a little bit because, like I said, one of the problems with the first edition was little typos and things. I really want to put a lot of effort this time into making sure I catch all the errors I can possibly catch. But yeah, they were really excited about it. I guess everybody has been impressed so far.
I thought it was interesting because there's a note where you say that the game Torment Tides of Numenera, you say it's something like it's more interesting than enjoyable. And then there's a note where Shane comes in and says, no, I think this game's amazing or something. And that was the only place that I noticed where there was, the two of you were kind of had different takes on something.
Yeah, that might be. He's got slightly different picks for his, like the games we love the best. Or I don't think he's, we did a radio show recently with him. We were thinking about the games that we like the best. His favorite CRPG of all time is Knights of the Old Republic. That'd definitely be high on my list, but I guess our experiences differ enough. I'm a Baldur's Gate 2 man. But I can see where he's coming from on that. Yeah, but it wasn't like I don't remember ever having a big disagreement, about anything while we're writing this. Although he kind of insinuates, he's the one that did all the jokes the first and the last chapter. So he kind of makes it sound like we're this Abbott and Costello duo or something. It really wasn't anything like that, but we just kind of had more fun than anything else.
So you must spend a lot of time thinking about what your ideal CRPG is, or do you ever think about making your own CRPG or consulting on CRPG design or anything like that?
Yeah, I think about that all the time. I'm really hoping to get... I've kind of been playing around with the idea for a while, but hoping that maybe this summer might give me a chance to really, at least get my feet wet with development. I've done some small games before. Just little arcadey kind of games, but yeah, you can't help but think about it, right? You play these games and you think, well, I really like this element, but why did they do this? Or I like that element from this other game. Wouldn't it be great if you could combine some of these things into a game, a new kind of game? But I'm really kind of excited at the moment. I've got this plan. I want to do something kind of like Might and Magic 6. I don't know if you played that one, The Mandate of Heaven.
I played Might and Magic 4 quite a bit, but I haven't played any of the later ones.
Well, the thing I keep coming back to this game is it's basically a first-person shooter engine with the role-playing mechanics wrapped around that. So you have a full party, you have spells, you have all that dungeons, but it's basically using this first-person shooter engine. So you're kind of going around attacking things like you would in a first-person shooter. And I think, what I find appealing about that is there's these programs out there like Unity, which again are really good at making first-person shooter games, right? And so I'm thinking if I was going to make a game, if it was something that would be doable for me, the less I have to reinvent the wheel, the better. And I think with that sort of first-person format, and plus there hasn't been, to my knowledge, a lot of games made like that in recent years, but yet a lot of demand for it. So I think it'd be a pretty good niche to explore, to see what I can do with it. I don't want to promise anything yet. It's kind of early. But yeah, it's certainly an aspiration of mine.
I mean, I think it's interesting that, Brian Fargo's Kickstarted games were so successful, getting millions of dollars in funding. And then, SSI, sort of some of those guys reconstituted themselves as TSI, and they were trying to fund something called Seven Dragon Saga, and it wasn't successful. I was just curious why you think that there was such a big difference there. I've seen that
time and time again. I really think there's a disconnect sometimes with the writers and the designers and the developers of games and the players. Because I think, unless I think some of these folks, it's kind of like with Dungeons and Dragons, right? I recently started playing a bunch. For some reason, I've been playing more tabletop Dungeons and Dragons than ever before. What I notice is the people that are new to the game, they want to jump into something that's very traditional, almost cliched, like very stereotyped. Just give me elves, dwarves, a dragon, swords, axes. They're just really sort of basic swords and sorcery fantasy, right? That's what they would like to see. They don't mind that this is the same elf tropes that have been in place since Tolkien, right? That not only do they not mind that, they actually prefer that. Whereas I think the writers and designers, developers have a different kind of mindset, right? They want to show how creative they are and how original they are. And like, here's a new twist, like with the Dragon Age, the elves will be totally different in this game, and we'll shave the dwarves. The dwarves won't have beards, and but it's just kind of annoying. It's either annoying or just kind of to so many of the players. Now, the players that have really been hardcore about it, they're the ones that want to go into like we're talking about the Numenera game. Somebody that's just played D&D to death. They're kind of hungry for something different, some kind of alternative. But for the masses out there, they're not really demanding that alternative because they haven't gotten their fill of the main fare, right? And I think that's really a lot where computer role-playing games are. There hasn't been enough of these compared to the tabletop role-playing games. So there's plenty of room, I think. Plenty of room just for standard fantasy, swords and sorcery, dwarves with beards and Scottish accents, the works, in the computer game environment.
Well, that's what I was wondering with the TSI Kickstarter, is that the footage they showed, it didn't look like the Gold Box games, and I wonder if it had looked more like that. I'm thinking of, I don't know if you followed the Thimbleweed Park Kickstarter, but they said that what they wanted that game to look like is how you remembered the LucasArts games looking. So it looks better, but it looks like, how your rosy memories of it, how it looks in your memory.
Yeah, and that worked out well for them. Yeah, I guarantee you if Seven Dragon Saga, because they kind of had a Far Eastern vibe to it, if I recall correctly, right? I think if they had gone with something that was just more like a Wizard's Crown or the Gold Box game, more standard fantasy, I think it would have been a shoe-in. Trying to do something a little bit too beyond the pale. It's kind of like with was it Obsidian that did that Tyranny game? The stuff that's really impressive for critics to write about, and again, they get to seem like they're really creative and original with this sort of off-putting setting, but it just doesn't really work. It's going to be kind of cool. Like I love Planescape Torment, the first Planescape Torment. It's a great game. It's very philosophical. and all that. But it's obviously it's not going to be a mainstream hit. It's more of a be the equivalent of like a Sundance film.
Right.
Right. So yeah, if I had been in charge of this TSI project, I'd say let's just at least start like Obsidian did with their Pillars of Eternity, more standard sort of fantasy. Let's see how that goes, and then we can do this sort of side project. We can do the more creative, original stuff kind of as a side project.
Yeah, I just think if they had a video and they had like the little guys with the little animation and you kill the dragon, it's with all the skull and crossbones things. I mean, I think that would be, that would really get the fans of those games excited.
Oh yeah, sure. I would have been happy. I don't know if this would have even been possible with all the licensing and everything, but I've been quite happy to play just Pool of Radiance. Update the interface on that, give me a decent UI to work with. I've been more than pleased. It's like, take my money. Here's $500 for your super royal collectible. Share a jacuzzi with the developer package, whatever. Whereas I don't think this other game, people just really weren't all that excited about. I think it kind of hit the nail on the head with that. Thimbleweed Park's a really great thing, because it's like here's the reason anybody cares about this anyway, right? They have these memories of these early Maniac Mansion or whatever it is, right? And so don't come at me with this totally different project. Just because it's you involved in it is not enough. The game itself needs to be similar to that, to harken back to that era.
Right. You mentioned like what the critics say, and when I think of experts on CRPGs, I think of you, and then I also think of Scorpia, who wrote all these reviews for Computer Gaming World back in the day, and then the CRPG addict, Chester Bolingbroke. And I was just curious if you had interacted with either of them at all.
Oh yeah, a lot. Actually co-written some stuff with the Scorpia. And CRPG addict. I don't know if I'd say we're chums or anything. We certainly have collaborated and talked to each other. And I'll ask him questions, and he refers quite often to my books and blogs and stuff on his in his coverage. Of course, they're all happy doing what they do.
I mean, I thought it was interesting with the CRPG addict. I don't know how much of this is played up at all, but he says that he actually is addicted to RPGs. That there was this post he had one time where he says, like, I wish I wasn't. I wish I would do something else, but I can't stop playing these games.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know him really well personally. I think about somebody being addicted. I think that to me means they're unable to have a normal life, right? They can't hold down a job, and they can't have a relationship with significant relationships in their life because they're too, it's literally they can't do it because they can't stop playing, or can't stop the whatever the addictive behavior is. I really think I don't know about Chet's point of view on that, but I really hesitate to call a game addictive, for that, because for me it just kind of brings up, I don't want gaming associated with alcoholism or drugs. There's plenty of that already in the pop culture. I don't want to contribute to that idea.
Yeah.
I just say if a game is really fun and engaging, you want to play it, but I don't know, unless you have a really crappy job or crappy family, you're not going to want to choose the game over them, right?
Well, but for the people with crappy families, I mean, then
well, there's a lot more going on there than the game being fun. Yeah, it's all about the Fortnite. I keep hearing this on the news, right? It's such a big concern. All the kids are playing Fortnite, and they're, what? It's going to be this is the beginning of the end, right? The apocalypse, and this is worse than crack cocaine, or this is worse than meth. Like, come on, give me a break. Have you ever seen a meth addict?
Well, but if this is the apocalypse, all the kids will be well prepared, right? Because they've played so much Fortnite.
Yeah, anything new. I mean, we go all the way back to D&D, right? It was the same. Whatever the kids these days are into, it's not what we were into, and that would have been bad enough, But this new thing, it's just ridiculous. I mean, all the people I know who play D&D, that kind of keeps them out of trouble. A lot of cases, right? It's not getting them into trouble.
I mean, it does, from the book, it seems like you do have a little bit of a, like, kids these days get off my lawn kind of attitude with all their, like, action RPGs and, cutscenes and stuff. Like, who needs that stuff?
Yeah, I hope that comes across as kind of tongue-in-cheek, but yeah, there's definitely a generational divide or two in any kind of genre of games, right? But yeah, you certainly see that. I was kind of jokingly saying that the game I hate the most is the first Diablo, because that was really where I see is the turning point. And it's like after that everything, and also with Skyrim. It's kind of as a joke, talk about how Skyrim is just this terrible game. But yeah, it really changes the nature of the game. Really, probably Skyrim more than. What's the other one that everybody always talks about? Super hard.
Dark Souls.
Dark Souls. Games of that sort. To me, they're not even really role-playing games because it's instead of the characters learning from experience, it's really just you learning how to, control your character better. Well, what buttons to mash, basically, right? And here's the special moves to do and the timing. It's really more about your dexterity as a player, more than it is about this sort of learning from experience that we talked about. So I don't know if to me, it's almost kind of an apples and oranges thing after a while. I mean, can you even compare Dark Souls to Ultima? It just doesn't work, right? But it's come at the expense, I think, of those single-player turn-based RPGs. I mean, there for a long time, it's just the very words turn-based was enough just to everybody would laugh at you, right? Who wants that? It's boring. You want action, action, action. But we see like Divinity Original Sin 2. I mean, I love that. Not just the game, but the fact that they were really able to show, no, turn-based is awesome, right? It's such a big hit and really proved that there's plenty of people that like that more tactical experience.
I'm curious what you think about this, because one of my sort of philosophical difficulties with CRPGs is that I feel like since the characters get more powerful the longer you play, a lot of times you don't actually have to learn the game systems that well in order to beat the game, because your characters have just gotten so powerful that you don't need to learn how to use all the spells or use the best strategies and things like that. I feel this way when I read the CRPG Addict and he's talking about these games and I'm like, oh my God, I was so bad at this game compared to him. I just played for so long that, there was no way that I could help but win it.
Yeah, I know it's sort of the God phenomenon or whatever you want to call it. A lot of, especially games that'll have a place where you can go and grind. Basically just go fight a bunch of low-level, easy battles until you level up, and then you go back and defeat the boss without having to implement any real tactics and strategies. Yeah, I certainly see that. I think it's, one solution to that is to do what I call move the goalposts, or what they call it, level scaling. So the monsters are always a little bit tougher than you. They're always a little bit higher in level. The problem with that, though, I think it's kind of satisfying in a way when you can go back to one of these monsters that really gave you such a hard time and just kick its butt. I think that's great for kids too, to kind of teach them about the values of just being persistent and steadily improving, and don't get too discouraged that you weren't able to defeat the boss the first time, right? Go learn some stuff. Go learn some stuff, kid. Come back. Maybe do better the next time. But I'll tell you something that really impressed me about this Druidstone game. I don't want to sound like I'm just a commercial for them, but I like the way they handle difficulty. And this is something I do talk a lot about in the book, because it's really one of the key things for a game designer. If you don't get that balance right, your game is going to stink, right? It's not going to be any it's just going to be frustrating, or it's going to be too easy, right? I think it's kind of underappreciated art to have a game that's just so well balanced, where it's just hard enough that you feel challenged, but you don't feel just like you say that. Like, oh damn it, I don't have to. Or I guess that'd be a case of it being too easy, right? I can grind enough and then come back and just one shot the boss. But anyway, what's cool about this Druidstone game is they give you these bonus objectives you can work towards. And instead of just being like an achievement or a badge or just something kind of meaningless, it actually gives you additional quest rewards. So basically gives your characters gems that you can make your party more powerful with. But it really gives you an incentive not just to play the level, get through it, but really to play it well. See what I'm saying? To really leverage all your tactics and the abilities of your characters. And I just think that's magnificent design. I mean, it's just way more advanced than just saying, well, why don't you play on hard mode and we'll just double all the monsters' hit points and make them hit harder. This is a way. I like this method way better because you do have that option. If you're just really struggling, you just want to get through the level, you could shoot for that, or if you do want to challenge yourself more, you can go for those bonus objectives. So I like to see that, and I think that should be the way going forward.
I wanted to ask you about this. So toward the end of the book, you talk about something called Robot Cash, which is some sort of cryptocurrency plan where you can resell your games. Do you know what I'm talking about?
That would probably be Shane talking about that, because it's not ringing any bells.
I'll just read you what it says. It says, Robot Cash, with names like Brian Fargo and Nolan Bushnell involved, hopes to be a Steam competitor that takes a much smaller cut per digital game sold. Resold games will result in additional payment to the game's publisher or developer. Robot Cash is creating its own cryptocurrency called Iron, a nod to the Iron Bank from Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
Would I would need to ask Shane about that, or you don't know anything about that?
Yeah, I'm sure Shane. This sounds like it's from his chapter. Yeah. I've heard him talk about that off and on. Yeah, they don't. A lot of people don't like Steam for several reasons. Or there's some problems with Kickstarter, and was it they were using Fig? They still don't want to make a game-centric system, and I think it's in some ways, I guess, the deck is stacked a little bit even now against some of the smaller studios, and they don't like having to give up so much of their money, right, handed over to these other streaming services. So yeah, I don't really know how that's working out for them.
Yeah, I mean, I have some friends who made a like iPhone RPG kind of game, and yeah, it was a great game, but just watching what they had to go through, and it was
the Apple stores, yeah, horrific. Yeah, I've just heard many stories just about how difficult it is to even get on there, and you're just seeing a smaller share of your revenue, which that's kind of the. We're talking about all the way back to the Gold Box series and Baldur's Gate. That's one of the problems they had, because they had to, on the one hand, pay all these licensing fees to TSR, who are Wizards of the Coast, right, for the rights to use the D&D stuff. So that was already a cut. And then the publisher gets a cut. And I guess with something like Steam, they get a cut. So pretty soon, it's like you might be paying $60 for that game, but the developers might only end up with a small fraction. And that certainly doesn't seem right.
Yeah, so I don't know. Hopefully things will improve. But yeah, I mean, that's something that really came through reading your book, is that it's never been easy making CRPGs. No matter what era you're in, it's always a big challenge.
Mm-hmm. Well, any game development book you pick up will tell you that making a role-playing game is one of the hardest kind of games to make. And a lot of that difficulty, it's not just coming up with a good story and characters. That seems like relatively easy stuff. The hard part is just getting that difficulty right, working out all the balancing. So you kind of avoid the problems you were talking about. You don't want the characters to get too powerful too quickly. On the other hand, you don't want to make it so hard they just get frustrated and turn away, right? And you want them to be using those cool abilities and all that stuff you came up with. So there's a lot of play testing. Yeah, that's probably the big difference between a good and a great CRPG, or even a regular RPG, right? It's just how much work went into balancing that, play testing it, refining it.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting because you make the point that so many designers seem to be really impressed by their beautiful prose or their great storyline or something.
Yeah, it's painful sometimes. And I can't imagine how they must feel when they see these Let's Plays where somebody's just rapidly clicking through the dialogue to get to the game. But yeah, this is coming from a writer. I'm an English professor. I love great prose. It's what I do. But I can see when it's in creative writing, they talk about show, don't tell. It's one of the big mantras. Don't just tell us things. Show the characters doing it, or don't just say that this house is scary. Describe the house in such a way that makes us scared reading it. But yeah, there's a lot of problems with writing in these games. The exposition dumps are just rampant. Where to even begin? But yeah, that's probably where I would put if I was making a game myself, that's, as long as the story makes sense, and it's at least a few likable characters, and, you put them in, you present them with some kind of a challenge and give the player and the characters a good reason to want to resolve it. I think you're fine with that. But it's just when these critics and reviewers, especially the ones in the magazines or the blogs, the more text-heavy ones, there's only so much you can really say about the gameplay, right? I say, well, it's fun. What else do you say? Whereas they can really spill just endless ink on the character arcs and the story and the lore and the setting, and so that's the kind of stuff that tends to get magnified in reviews of the games, and the stuff that really matters to players doesn't really get much coverage because it is more challenging. I think you really have to know a game well to be really super well to be able to talk about the gameplay mechanics versus just, like you say, the sort of easy back copy stuff about the story.
Right. I wanted to ask you, I looked at your blog, and one of the entries I saw, it's called "What's Wrong with Matt Chat?" And
oh man, that's going back.
You were sort of lamenting that, you're putting out all this great content with all these amazing designers and everything, and some like somebody just posts like their opinion about a game or something is getting more views. I was just curious, what do you think about that now, or has that situation improved at all, or like, do you have any thoughts about that blog post?
Oh yeah, I mean, I still think about that. I was just watching. I like to watch these video bloggers, whatever you want to call them, where they're talking about their survival skills, like how to survive out in the woods. I was listening to one, and he was talking about the same thing, and the sort of the dangers. It's Dave Canterbury, if you're curious. He's a pretty successful guy. I mean, he's got, I don't know how many tens of thousands of views he's got. He's not huge. He was on the Discovery Channel for a while with a show. But anyway, yeah, he talked about that and said that one of the worst things you can do as sort of a social media presence or personality is start comparing yourself to other people.
Mm-hmm.
And because it probably just is going to get really discouraging. And I definitely agree with him on that. Just the other day, you look at these, you look for your videos and you feel like, well, okay, this video's doing pretty good. It's already got like 600 views on it. And then you look at some other person's video and you're like, well, how the hell? Like 70,000 views for that, I mean, what the heck is going on? And, you just start feeling like, do they just know something I don't, or is it just some indefinable quality that they possess? I've even entertained the thought that maybe they're paying for these bots to come on and inflate their numbers, just like, what the heck? But yeah, I don't really have that's the, number one thing I get asked all the time is like from especially students that are interested in doing this kind of work is like, what do I do to get my numbers up? And, how do I build a big audience and all this stuff? And I kind of like, don't ask me. But I think too, it's, if you're always chasing after the masses, right? Going for that mainstream appeal. I don't know how often that really works out for people. I think you might be like, I'm satisfied and in fact delighted to have my audience. For Matt Chat and these books, they're great people. They're the kind of people that I like to hang out with. I think keeping them happy is a lot more important to me than attracting 10,000 casual people that might just not even really care about what I'm talking about.
Well, and so often it seems like those really popular things, they are really snarky or really, stoking anger or, things like that. And, like, I don't see how that wouldn't be, that's just not compatible with, talking to game designers about their process, I mean, it doesn't feed into that kind of.
Yeah, sometimes people don't even want to come on the show because they assume it's going to be that kind of deal now. And I'm like, no. Just go watch a couple of my previous interviews. You'll see. It's not like I'm trying to catch you or, embarrass you or whatever. But yeah, there's certainly a lot of that going on. And I think, too, just kind of going all the way back to the whole problem with the single-player RPGs and thinking they were dead, right? There's just, the mainstream doesn't care about this stuff. Never will. You'll have a lot more successful chance if you can get a bunch of videos about Legend of Zelda or Pokemon or Fortnite. That's going to get a lot more. There's a lot bigger audience for that, but I don't know. What do you think? I tend to think it kind of gets counterbalanced by the fact that so many other YouTubers are doing that, covering that same material. How's your Fortnite video going to stand out against the millions of videos up there?
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know about Fortnite particularly, but I do think that we're sort of seeing a turn that for a long time people have built audiences by being outrageous or stoking anger or things like that. But I feel like that's starting to turn now where, the people do, like there's so much anger everywhere that you can go anywhere for it. So people aren't really that loyal to any particular source of outrage. And the people
shallow,
who... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I mean, yeah, it's just a real kind of a shallow thing to do, right? Just let me see what kind of outrageous thing I can say to this person and get a few clickbait, get some good clickbait out there. But I don't know. Is it the Howard Stern effect?
Yeah, but I just wanted to say to you, because I've as I said, I've been a fan of your videos for years, and I just love what you do, and I wouldn't want. I just love your passion, and I wouldn't want you to try to like change that to chase some other audience.
Oh, no, yeah. If I haven't changed now, don't worry about it. But yeah, that was a decision I made pretty early on. Was I was just going to keep everything family friendly? I'm not going to be dropping the F-bomb on the show or just acting like I do kind of get goofy, I won't lie, but not do anything too outrageous. Just gotta be myself, I guess. I guess that's the key, is just kind of be myself, being authentic. I wouldn't talk to when I talk to developers, I have a lot of respect for them. It would never occur to me to try to be rude or, again, keep coming back to something that's embarrassing. And usually I'll even ask them before the interview, look, is there anything that you're uncomfortable talking about? And if they tell me, I won't bring it up. So hopefully that has sort of cemented my reputation amongst the developer community, where Matt Barton's a guy they can trust. They shouldn't have any misgivings about going on my show.
Do you feel pretty plugged in now to the developer community? Like do you socialize with any of the people, or are you friends with them, or?
I'd probably, I like to think so. I mean, we got some Facebook channels with some fairly well-known developers. I try to make a habit of not pestering them, insinuating myself somehow. But I think there's that there's some love there for Matt Chat. One of these days, I'd love to go to the game developer conference or game developer convention. It's been a long time since I've been there, but I'm almost kind of worried. Like, I wonder if people would recognize me. And I wouldn't remember who they were. It's almost to that point now. Like, oh yeah, because I'm pretty terrible with names. So basically, I'd have to do my own homework, watch all my interviews again, make sure I know who everybody is and their stories, so that if that were to happen, I mean, is that an irrational fear to have? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. There's probably ways. I always find it's good to, if there's someone you don't know, you can't remember who they are, you introduce them to someone else, and then they'll say who they are, and then that kind of clues you in.
Mm-hmm.
You introduce them to a third person who just walked up or something.
Yeah, this is, hi, this is, oh, yeah, I'm sure that probably would never happen, but it's the sort of thing you think about.
Well, speaking of love for Matt Chat, I personally appreciated that on page 464, you used my Richard Garriott quote from my interview with Richard Garriott. So that's why I always read the footnotes, so I can see if anyone quoted my interview.
I see those wonderful footnotes. Yeah, I'm on the page. What did you say? Where did you say it was?
It's the quote from Richard Garriott. He's talking about how so many MMOs and things, you don't have to think. You just kind of like click you just follow the sign on the map. And yeah, that's from in the footnote, it says Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. So I was like, oh wow.
That's a good resource. Yeah. You're no longer exploring. You're no longer actually problem solving. You're no longer actually thinking about why or how should I interact in a particular way in this particular situation. Oh, he's talking about the mindless. Yeah, just mindlessly completing quest after quest. Yeah, that is a good quotation. Thank you for that.
Yeah, I mean, he says that in a lot of interviews, so I don't know how much credit I can take for that, but I appreciated that the Geek's Guide to the Galaxy showed up in your footnotes.
Well, it did inspire me. I've been going back to some World of Warcrafting and thinking about that quote or that sentiment. How many times I've probably leveled up. I probably don't even want to think about it. However many characters. And yeah, usually you get to this point where you don't even read the quest text. You just see what do I have to do to achieve this and move on. You're always like in this big rush to get through, and there's not really very good reasons to care. Like, why would you even read the quest text? It's not essential for the game. It's not going to impact how well you do on the quest or anything like that. But this last time I've played through, I am making a point of reading everything. Yeah, I do find it a little more rewarding. So I think Garriott is right there. If they could find a way to make it a little more compelling, where it didn't feel like an obligation, you know what I'm saying?
Well, I really liked what you said, where like we said in Pool of Radiance, all that stuff was in a little book, and you could just kick back on your couch with your feet up and read it. You didn't have to sit there staring at the screen reading these huge blocks of text.
Well, that's something like that's exactly right. I've been looking for a while. This World of Warcraft game has just gotten so huge, and there's so many. The story just seems, like I don't even know how to get started trying to figure out what the heck's going on in this thing. I probably should just see if there's some novels out that would sort of just break it down in a novel format. Because that's how I got interested. I'm sure I'm not the only one. When we were growing up playing these fantasy games, we're reading like the Dragonlance novels. You read Tolkien. Most of that comes from the reading, not so much the games. You kind of have all that in the background and the back of your mind as you're playing the games, right? But it's not like the DM's always, explaining everything. They don't have to, right? Because you got that shared experience, that shared fiction, I guess. Yeah, I'd love to see that.
Do you think you would ever write any fantasy fiction?
Oh, probably. That could be very intimidating. Talking about comparing yourself to others, though. I was just always struck every time I go into Barnes and Noble. I'm just like, wow, there's so many authors, so many novels I've never heard of, and I'm sure they're all wonderful. How could I possibly make my stuff stand out? But it'd be a lot of fun. I've kind of dabbled with it, sure.
Well, the last, I just interviewed Jeffrey Deaver, and his most recent book is sort of a crime thriller set in the video game industry. So maybe you could write something like that, because you have all this inside knowledge about game designers and things.
I did have that experience as reading Ready Player One recently. And I mean, it almost got annoying, because everybody's like, Matt, Bart, you've got to read this book. You've got to read. It's like they're almost like forcing it down my throat. And so I don't have to read anything. And I finally read it. The whole time I'm reading, and I'm just like, man, I could have written this. I could have. I'm sure everybody has that experience of a certain age, of a certain background. But yeah, it really kind of felt like something I could have written. You almost kind of kicking yourself for not doing it, though.
Yeah. All right, so now we're pretty much out of time. So I think we should start wrapping this up pretty soon. Do you have any final thoughts or just anything else you wanted to talk about?
I don't know. What do you think? Is there something, we talked about the book and the channel. I don't know. I guess that's about all I could come up with.
All right, great. Yeah, so let's wrap it up then. And I am looking forward to, if you ever make a CRPG, I'm definitely looking forward to playing it because you obviously know a lot about CRPG design.
I can say one other thing, I guess, now that I've thought about it. So another one of the questions I get asked a lot is, what are some good games to play? We grew up, a lot of us had a certain computer like a Commodore 64 or a DOS machine, or a few lucky ones had the Apple II, right? And so I think one of the great things about a book like this is that you can really flip through it and see games that you might not have heard about before. And I try to write in this, I really try to make it clear which ones hold up well, what it takes to get that game and to play it now. And that's where I really kind of want to shine the light on a website called GOG.com, goodoldgames.com, because they actually make a lot of these old games available. So all you have to do is just click the link, install the game, boom, you're good to go. You don't have to worry with emulators and things. Because that was one of the problems I had with the first edition. It was just so hard getting these games to work on a modern computer, right? And so that's basically trivial nowadays. So really, instead of just looking at a book like this as a bunch of obsolete games, you might actually see some games that look interesting. You go back and play those very easily now. And so there's a whole world of games that, as we talked about at the start of this interview, right? Even I haven't really played all the way through. Maybe Chester has. But yeah, these are games, it's not just the history, right? These are games you might enjoy now.
I also think just even if you're not planning to play any of these games, or especially the older ones, that you sort of highlight what the interesting feature of a lot of these games are. And so, I've sort of harbored fantasies of, I would love to make my own CRPG someday. And so I went through your book and underlines all the this game has these attributes, and this game has these attributes and these skills.
That's great.
And,
Yeah.
Here's the standout features from all these different games. So if I ever get to make my own CRPG,
that is great to hear you say that. Yeah, because that's one of the things I had in mind writing this. I kept imagining these aspiring developers and designers reading it. So I try to mention things from every game that, maybe it was something that worked out well, but for whatever reason just kind of fell off the radar. Nobody ever imitated it, even though it was a good idea. Just kind of didn't get enough attention, whatever. And so pointing those out, and also the stuff that maybe that it failed, or the game failed, but nevertheless it was a really good idea, and it really should have been, somebody should follow up on that.
Yeah, so if there are any aspiring CRPG designers listening to this, definitely check out this book, and, looking forward to what games everyone out there comes out with, too.
I've done so much of the work for you. just read the book and you'll get all kinds of tips like do's and don'ts, paths that are underdeveloped, stuff that's been overdone,
Yeah, and definitely listen to Matt Barton. He knows what he's talking about. He's basically the force behind Wasteland, too. So, speaking with authority here. All right, so Matt, let's wrap this up there then. So we've been speaking with Matt Barton and this new book that everyone should check out. It's called Dungeons and Desktops, 2nd edition. So Matt, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Dave. Been a pleasure and an honor, sir.
And that was our interview. So big thanks again to Matt Barton for joining us on the show. And remember that Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is made possible thanks to support from listeners like you. So if you enjoy the show and want it to continue, please sign up to give us $1 or $2 per episode over at patreon.com/geeks. And if you'd rather make a one-time contribution, you can do that via check or PayPal over at geeksguideshow.com/crowdfunding. So big thanks again to everyone who's contributed. We really appreciate it. All right, so that was our show. So thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.
The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is a production of Wired.com. For more information about the show, visit geeksguideshow.com. To learn more about your host, visit davidbarrkirtley.com. Music and voiceover produced by yours truly, Jack Kincaid. If you enjoyed this program, tell your friends. If you didn't enjoy it, tell no one. Thank you for listening.